A marriage forged in desperation, a woman abandoned to die. But when plague strikes and the powerful fall silent, she will make a choice that shatters every rule and proves that true strength isn't born from privilege, but from the courage to stand when everyone else runs. Stay until the end to see how one defiant act changes everything. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. Let's see where you're watching from. The rain came down like judgment. Rowan Blackthorne stood in the circular drive of Ashford Manor, water streaming off the brim of his hat, staring at the house that had once been his pride. 3 stories of gray stone rose against the November sky, windows dark except for a scattered few on the ground floor. The east wing, the entire damn east wing, sat black and lifeless. He'd been gone 8 months. 8 months running from creditors in the capital, 8 months pretending he could solve his problems anywhere but here. The manor looked like it had been waiting for him to fail. "Sir?" His driver Patterson stood by the carriage with water dripping from his coat. "Should I just go?" Rowan cut him off. "Stable the horses. I'll send for the bags later." Patterson nodded and drove off, leaving Rowan alone with his inheritance and his mistake. The marriage had been the price. Lord Elridge, some minor landowner from the Middle Territories with more daughters than prospects, had offered a solution Rowan couldn't refuse. Cancel the debts, save the land, all for the cost of taking one girl off his hands. Mara. 22 years old, plain as brown bread, educated beyond what was proper for a woman. Elridge had made it clear she was difficult, headstrong, unmarriageable by normal standards. Rowan had signed the papers without meeting her. The wedding had been a civil affair, 15 minutes in a magistrate's office, 2 witnesses he'd never seen before, and a girl in a gray dress who'd looked at him exactly once. Her eyes had been dark, steady. She hadn't smiled. He'd put her in the East Wing the day she arrived and left for the capital a week later. That had been March. This was November. The front door opened before he reached it. Mrs. Calloway stood in the entry, her gray hair pinned tight, her face unreadable. "Mr. Blackthorne. Not welcome home. Not we missed you." Just his name, flat as a tombstone. "Mrs. Calloway." He stepped inside, shaking water from his coat. The entry hall felt different. Cleaner, maybe. The old portrait of his grandfather had been straightened. There were fresh rushes on the floor. "I trust your business in the capital was successful," she said. It wasn't a question. She knew damn well it hadn't been. "Where's my wife?" The words felt strange in his mouth. He'd never called her that out loud. Mrs. Calloway's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Disapproval, maybe. "In the East Wing, sir. Where you left her." "Is she—" He stopped. What was he going to ask? Is she alive? Is she still here? "Send word I've returned." "She knows, sir." Mrs. Calloway stepped back. "Will you be wanting dinner?" "In an hour." She nodded and disappeared down the hall toward the kitchens. Rowan stood alone in the entry, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. The house felt different. Not empty. He'd expected empty, but occupied in a way that didn't include him. He headed for his study. The room was exactly as he'd left it. Desk still covered in papers he'd meant to sort, brandy decanters still half empty on the sideboard, the same stack of unpaid bills in the corner that he'd been ignoring since his father died. He poured himself a drink and stood at the window, looking out at the gardens. They'd been overgrown when he left. Wild rose bushes choking the paths, weeds claiming the fountain, the whole thing going to seed. Now they were not perfect, but managed. Someone had cut back the roses. The paths were visible again. The fountain was running. He took a long drink. A knock at the door. "Come." It was Garrett, his steward, middle-aged, competent, loyal to the point of stupidity. The man had stayed when 3 other servants had quit over unpaid wages. "Sir." Garrett stepped inside, hat in his hands. "Good to have you back." "Is it?" Garrett's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "The estate's been well managed in your absence." "By you?" "No, sir." Rowan turned from the window. "Then who?" Garrett looked at him for a long moment. "Your wife, sir." The words hung in the air like smoke. "My wife," Rowan repeated slowly, has been managing the estate. Yes, sir. The woman I left in the East Wing with instructions to stay out of sight. Those were your instructions, sir, not hers. Rowan set down his glass with a sharp click. Explain. Garrett stepped further into the room. She waited 2 weeks after you left. Then she came down to the kitchens and asked Mrs. Calloway for a tour of the house. Mrs. Calloway gave it to her. After that, she asked to see the account books. I showed her. She asked about the tenants, the yields, the repair schedule. I told her everything. Why in hell would you? Because she asked the right questions, sir. Garrett's voice was level. And because someone needed to. Rowan felt heat crawl up his neck. Go on. She started with the gardens. Said they were a waste to let them die. Got 2 of the stable boys to help her clear the paths. After that, she noticed the roof leaking in the servants' quarters. Had it patched. Then she found out 3 tenant families were behind on rent because the irrigation system on the north field had failed. She organized a work crew to fix it. With what money? She sold her jewelry, sir. Rowan stared at him. Her what? The jewelry she brought with her. 2 bracelets and a necklace. Garnets, mostly. She took them to town and sold them to pay for materials, said she wasn't using them anyway. Garrett paused. The tenants remember it. They know who fixed their fields. Rowan turned back to the window. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. A figure moved through the garden, small, wrapped in a dark cloak, carrying a basket. He watched her stop at the fountain, kneel down, and pull weeds from the base. That's her? He asked. Yes, sir. She stood up, brushed dirt from her hands, and kept walking. She didn't look toward the house. Didn't look anywhere but straight ahead, like she was alone in the world. What else? Rowan asked quietly. Garrett hesitated. She's been teaching. Teaching what? Reading. Math. 3 days a week in the village. She set up a schoolroom in the old Grange Hall. About 20 children come now. Some adults, too. And you let her. I'm the steward, sir, not the master of the house. Garrett's voice was careful. She's the lady here. She acted like it. No one stopped her. Rowan turned around. Does she know I'm back? Yes, sir. Mrs. Calloway sent word an hour ago. And? She said to tell you welcome home. It sounded like mockery. Maybe it was. Anything else I should know? Garrett shifted his weight. The servants respect her, sir. Some of the tenants, too. She's not... He stopped. Not what? Not what you thought she was. Rowan picked up his glass and drained it. That'll be all, Garrett. The steward left. Rowan stood alone in the study, staring at the closed door. His wife. The woman he'd married to save his land and then shoved into a corner like a shameful secret. She'd taken his neglect and turned it into something else. Something useful. He should have been relieved. The estate was stable. The tenants were paid. The house was running. Instead, he felt something sharp and uncomfortable twisting in his chest. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. Tout. Dinner was served at 7. Rowan sat alone at the head of the long dining table, the same table where his father had hosted parties for 30 guests. Now it was just him, a single place setting, and enough empty chairs to remind him of everything he'd lost. Mrs. Calloway brought the first course, soup, bread, butter. She set it down without comment. Where's my wife eating? Rowan asked. In her room, sir. Tell her to join me. Mrs. Calloway's eyebrows rose a fraction. Sir? You heard me. She left. Rowan ate his soup and waited. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Mara Blackthorne stepped into the dining room, and Rowan got his first real look at the woman he'd married. She was small, maybe 5.5 feet tall, slight in build, wearing a plain brown dress with no ornament. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot. Her face was narrow, unremarkable, not pretty, not ugly, just ordinary. But her eyes were sharp, dark brown, steady, assessing. She looked at him the same way she'd looked at him in the magistrate's office 8 months ago, like she was measuring him and finding him wanting. Mr. Blackthorne. She inclined her head, not quite a bow, barely a nod. Sit. She crossed the room and sat at the far end of the table, a good 15 feet away. Mrs. Calloway appeared with another place setting, arranged it quickly, and vanished. Silence. Mara picked up her spoon and started eating. "I hear you've been busy," Rowan said finally. "I had time." "Garrett tells me you've been managing the estate." "Someone had to." Her voice was calm. No accusation in it, just fact. "That wasn't your responsibility," Rowan said. She looked up at him. "Then whose was it?" He had no answer for that. "You left," she continued, setting down her spoon. "You left without instructions, without introducing me to the staff, without explaining anything about how this place runs. You put me in a wing of the house like a piece of furniture and disappeared. So I made myself useful. Was I supposed to sit in the dark and wait for you to remember I existed?" Her tone was still calm. That made it worse. "I had business in the capital," Rowan said. "For 8 months?" "Yes." "Running from your creditors isn't business, Mr. Blackthorne. It's cowardice." The word hit like a slap. Rowan set down his wine glass. "Watch your tongue." "Or what?" She leaned forward slightly. "You'll leave again? You'll ignore me more thoroughly than you already have? I'm not afraid of you. You can't hurt me worse than you already did by marrying me and then pretending I don't exist." He stared at her. This quiet, plain, unremarkable woman who was looking at him like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "I saved you," he said. "Your father couldn't marry you off. No one else wanted you. I gave you a name and a home." "You gave me nothing." Her voice was flat. "You gave yourself away to pay your debts. I was the currency. Don't pretend it was charity." She was right. He knew she was right. That made it harder to swallow. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "Where else would I go?" "Back to your father." She laughed, actually laughed. A short, bitter sound. "My father sold me to you like livestock. You think he'd take me back after you discarded me? I'd be ruined, unmarriageable, a failure." She picked up her spoon again. "So I stayed, and I made the best of it." Rowan watched her eat. She didn't look at him again. "Garrett says you sold your jewelry," he said. "It was mine to sell." "To fix the irrigation." "Yes." "Why?" She looked up at him, and for the first time something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe. "Because people needed it. The tenants were losing their crops. They'd lose their homes next. It cost me 2 bracelets to fix the problem. That seemed like a fair trade." "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." She set down her spoon again. "This is my home now. These are my people. If I'm going to live here, I'm going to make it livable. Not just for me, for everyone." "Your people," Rowan repeated. "Yes. They're my tenants. They're human beings, and they remember who helped them when things got bad." She stood up. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Blackthorne. If you'll excuse me, I have lesson plans to prepare for tomorrow." She walked out before he could respond. Rowan sat alone at the table, staring at her empty chair. He'd expected resentment, anger maybe, tears possibly. He'd expected her to be grateful he'd come back at all. Instead, she'd looked at him like he was an inconvenience. He finished his wine and went to bed. The next morning, he woke early. The rain had stopped overnight. The sky was gray but clear. Rowan dressed and went downstairs, intending to go over the account books with Garrett. Instead, he found himself walking toward the East Wing. He'd only been there once, the day Mara arrived, when he'd shown her the rooms and told her to stay out of sight. He remembered them as dusty, cold, neglected. The furniture had been covered in sheets. Now the hallway was clean. The windows were open. Sunlight streamed across polished floors. He found her sitting room first. It was small but comfortable. 2 chairs by the fireplace, a desk under the window, bookshelves lining one wall. The books were organized by subject. He recognized some of them from his father's library. Her bedroom door was open. He shouldn't have looked. He knew that. But he did anyway. The room was simple, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand. No ornament, no luxury. It looked like a servant's room. On the desk by the window there was a stack of papers covered in neat handwriting. Lesson plans. He picked one up. Reading primer. Week 3. Focus, basic sentence structure. Use common words. Practice with familiar objects. House, tree, dog. Keep sessions short. Children lose focus after 20 minutes. Beneath it was another page. Math. Addition and subtraction through 20. Use physical objects. Stones, sticks. Make it practical. Ask how many apples in a basket. How much change from a purchase. She'd written notes in the margins. Thomas struggles with numbers above 10. Needs extra help. Mary excels but gets bored. Give her harder problems. Rowan set down the papers and left the room. He found Garrett in the estate office, going over the ledgers. "Show me what she did," Rowan said. Garrett looked up, surprised. "Sir?" "The accounts, the repairs, everything. Show me." They spent 3 hours going through the books. Mara had been meticulous. Every expense was recorded, every repair documented. She'd prioritized the irrigation repairs first, the thing that would save the most livelihoods. Then the roof on the servants' quarters. Then the garden restoration, which had cost almost nothing but made the house look cared for again. She'd negotiated lower prices with suppliers by offering to pay in cash instead of credit. She'd organized work crews from the tenants, paying them in food and small repairs to their own homes. She'd stretched every coin as far as it would go. The estate wasn't profitable yet, but it was stable. No one was starving. No one was fleeing to find work elsewhere. "She did all this in 8 months?" Rowan asked. "Yes, sir." "Alone?" "She asked for help when she needed it, but the ideas were hers." Garrett closed the ledger. "She's good at this, sir. Better than most stewards I've known." Rowan sat back in his chair. "The teaching. Tell me about that." "She started it 3 months ago. Saw the village children running wild during the day while their parents worked. Asked the vicar if she could use the Grange Hall. He said yes. She started with reading, then arithmetic. Now she's teaching basic geography and history too." "Who asked her to do that?" "No one, sir. She just did it." "And the parents let her?" "They're grateful. Most of them can't read. They want better for their children." Garrett paused. "She doesn't charge anything, doesn't ask for anything. She just shows up 3 days a week and teaches." Rowan stood and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the north fields stretching toward the horizon. The crops were harvested now, the fields lying fallow for winter. But the irrigation channels were clear. The fences were mended. Everything looked tended. "Why?" he asked, not turning around. "Sir? Why does she care? She doesn't know these people. They're not her responsibility." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Maybe she thinks they are." That afternoon, Rowan rode into the village. It was a small place, maybe 200 people, clustered around a crossroads with a church, a tavern, a general store, and a handful of cottages. He knew most of the families by name, though he hadn't visited in over a year. People nodded to him as he passed, respectful but distant. No one smiled. He found the Grange Hall at the edge of the village. It was an old stone building used for storage and community meetings. The door was propped open. Inside, he could hear voices. He dismounted and walked to the doorway. Mara stood at the front of the room, writing on a makeshift chalkboard. 20 children sat on benches watching her. Some were as young as 5 or 6. Others were nearly teenagers. "Sound it out," she was saying to a girl in the front row. "What letter comes first?" "B," the girl said hesitantly. "Good. And the next?" "R." "Excellent. Now put them together." Bread?" "Exactly." Mara smiled. Actually smiled, the first time Rowan had seen it, and wrote the word on the board. "Bread. Well done, Emma." The girl beamed. Mara moved on to the next student, patient and encouraging. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lose her temper when a boy in the back kept fidgeting, just redirected him gently and kept teaching. Rowan watched from the doorway, unnoticed. This was his wife. The woman he'd married without looking at her. The woman he'd locked away in the East Wing like a shameful secret. She was teaching peasant children to read, and they loved her for it. "Mr. Blackthorne," he turned. An older woman stood behind him, Mrs. Harris, one of the tenant farmers' wives. Her face was weathered, her hands rough from work. "Mrs. Harris?" "Didn't expect to see you here, sir." There was something in her voice, not quite hostility, but not warmth either. I was passing through. She looked past him into the Grange hall. Your wife's a good woman, sir. Best thing that's happened to this village in years. I'm aware. Are you? Mrs. Harris looked at him directly. Because it seems to me you left her here to rot, and she turned it into something beautiful instead. Rowan's jaw tightened. That's not... I don't care about your reasons, sir. Mrs. Harris cut him off. I care that when my grandson got sick last month, she came to my house with medicine and sat up with him all night. I care that she taught my daughter to read so she won't be cheated at the market. I care that she sees us, really sees us, not as tenants or workers or problems to manage, as people. She stepped closer. You're the Lord here, sir. That's your birthright. But she's the one we'd follow into fire. She walked away before he could respond. Rowan stood there, listening to Mara's voice drift through the doorway. Let's try the next page. Who wants to read? A chorus of hands shot up. He rode back to the manor in silence. That night, he didn't ask her to join him for dinner. He ate alone, thinking. After the meal, he went to his study and poured himself a drink. Then another. The brandy burned going down, but it didn't quiet his thoughts. He'd spent 8 months running. Hiding from creditors, hiding from responsibility, hiding from the fact that he'd sold himself to save a pile of stone and land he didn't even want. Meanwhile, she'd stayed and built something real. There was a knock at the door. Come. Mara stepped inside. She was still wearing the same plain brown dress. Her hair was coming loose from its knot. You wanted to see me? She asked. I didn't send for you. Mrs. Calloway said you were drinking alone. That usually means you want to talk, but won't admit it. Despite himself, Rowan almost smiled. Mrs. Calloway's perceptive. She's loyal. There's a difference. Mara crossed to the window and looked out at the dark gardens. Why did you come back? This is my home. That's not an answer. He set down his glass. I ran out of places to run. She turned to look at him. That's more honest. I went to the village today, Rowan said. I saw you teaching. And? Mrs. Harris told me the village would follow you into fire. Mara's expression didn't change. Mrs. Harris is dramatic. Is she wrong? Mara was quiet for a moment. People respond to being seen, to being valued. I don't do anything extraordinary, I just pay attention. You teach children to read for free. Because they deserve to learn. You fixed the irrigation. Because people were suffering. You rebuilt this estate. Because someone had to. She crossed her arms. Why are you really here, Mr. Blackthorne? What do you want from me? He looked at her. This small, plain, unremarkable woman who'd done in 8 months what he hadn't managed in years. I don't know, he said honestly. Then figure it out. She moved toward the door. I'm tired of being invisible. If you want me to leave, say so. If you want me to stay, then acknowledge I exist. But I won't be a ghost in your house anymore. She left. Rowan sat alone in the study, staring at his empty glass. For the first time in years, he felt something other than numb. He felt awake. Okay. 3 weeks later, Rowan stopped leaving. He didn't decide to stay exactly. He just didn't book passage back to the capital. Didn't pack his bags. Didn't run. Instead, he watched. He watched Mara rise before dawn and walk through the house, checking on the servants, making sure the fires were lit, the meals were planned. He watched her spend an hour in the estate office with Garrett, going over accounts and crop rotations. He watched her ride to the village 3 times a week to teach. He watched her work. And slowly, he began to help. It started small. He joined Garrett for the weekly meeting with the tenants, listened as they brought their concerns, a broken fence, a sick cow, a dispute over boundaries. He watched Mara navigate each problem with patience and practical solutions. Fix the fence first, she said to one farmer. Then we'll talk about extending your lease. Show me you're committed. The farmer nodded, satisfied. Rowan said nothing, just observed. After the meeting, he found her in the garden. You didn't undercut me, he said. She looked up from the rosebush she was pruning. Why would I? I'm the Lord here. You could have gone over my head. I could have, she agreed, but that would undermine you, and a weak lord means a weak estate. I'm not interested in power games. I'm interested in results. She went back to pruning. Rowan watched her work. Teach me. She paused. What? Teach me how you do this. How you make them trust you. Mara studied him for a long moment. Then she handed him the shears. Start by doing something useful. He took the shears, and he started learning. Winter came early that year. By mid-December, snow had buried the north fields under 2 feet of white, and the temperature dropped so low that the well in the village square froze solid. Rowan spent his days learning what Mara had already mastered: how to stretch supplies, how to calm frightened tenants, how to make hard decisions when there were no good options. He was in the stables when Garrett found him, mucking out stalls alongside 2 farmhands. His hands were blistered, his back ached. He'd never worked like this in his life. Sir, Garrett's face was tight. We have a problem. Rowan straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. What kind? The Pembrokes. They're refusing to pay rent. The Pembrokes farmed the largest parcel on the western edge of the estate. 60 acres of good land that should have been producing decent yields. Thomas Pembroke was a hard man, nearly 60, with 3 grown sons who worked the farm with him. Why? Rowan asked. Rowan says the land's been mismanaged, says you owe him for repairs that never got done, says he won't pay another penny until you fix the drainage on the lower field. Rowan threw down the pitchfork. The drainage has been fine for 10 years. Not according to him. Garrett shifted his weight. He's got the other tenants talking, sir. Says if he doesn't pay, maybe they shouldn't either. That was the real problem. The Pembrokes were influential. If they started a rebellion, others would follow, and if the tenants stopped paying, the estate would collapse within a month. Where's Mara? Rowan asked. In the village, teaching. Of course she was. Rowan grabbed his coat. Get my horse ready. I'm going to talk to Pembroke. Sir, I didn't ask what you think. 20 minutes later, Rowan was riding through the snow toward the Pembroke farm. The wind cut through his coat like knives. The sky was the color of old iron. He found Thomas Pembroke in his barn, repairing a harness. The old man didn't look up when Rowan walked in. Mr. Pembroke. Mr. Blackthorne. Pembroke's voice was flat. Wondered when you'd show up. Garrett says you're refusing to pay rent. That's right. Mind telling me why? Pembroke set down the harness and finally looked at him. His face was weathered and hard, his eyes cold. Because you've been bleeding this land dry for years. Your father did it before you. I'm done paying for your mistakes. The rent is fair. Fair? Pembroke laughed. Fair would be you fixing the drainage like you promised 3 years ago. Fair would be you not running off to the capital while we scraped by. Fair would be you giving a damn about something other than your own comfort. Rowan's jaw tightened. I came back, only because you had nowhere else to go. Pembroke crossed his arms. And now you expect us to pretend like nothing happened? To keep paying while you play Lord of the Manor? No, sir, that's not how this works anymore. You signed a lease, and you broke the terms when you stopped maintaining the property, so here's what's going to happen. Pembroke stepped closer. You fix the drainage. You repair the fences on the south pasture. You give me a 3-year rent reduction to make up for the years you ignored us. Then maybe, we'll talk about me staying. You're making demands? Rowan couldn't believe what he was hearing. You work my land. You live in my house. You owe me. I don't owe you anything. Pembroke's voice was quiet but hard as stone. My family's been farming this land for 40 years. We made it profitable. We made it work. You just inherited it. There's a difference. Get out. Pembroke raised his eyebrows. Excuse me? You heard me. If you won't honor your lease, get off my land. You have 30 days. You can't do that. I can. And I am. Rowan turned toward the door. Find somewhere else to complain. He rode back to the manor with his hands shaking. He just evicted his largest tenant in winter, with no replacement lined up. It was the stupidest thing he could have done, and he knew it. But the disrespect, the casual way Pembroke had dismissed him, had lit something hot and ugly in his chest. He was still the lord here. That had to mean something, didn't it? He found Mara in the estate office when he got back. She looked up from the ledgers, took one look at his face, and set down her pen. What did you do? she asked. I evicted the Pembrokes. She stared at him. You what? They refused to pay rent. They made demands. I told them to leave. Mara stood up slowly. Are you out of your mind? They were undermining me. So you threw away your best tenants? 60 acres of productive land? The family that half the village respects? Her voice was rising. What were you thinking? I was thinking I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter. You don't matter. Mara slammed her hand on the desk. Not compared to the survival of this estate. Your pride isn't worth 60 acres and the loyalty of every other tenant who's watching to see what you'll do. I had to show strength. You showed weakness. Real strength would have been listening, negotiating, finding a solution that kept them here and productive. She moved around the desk. But instead, you acted like a child who got his feelings hurt. Watch your mouth. Or what? You'll evict me too? She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. I've been holding this place together with spit and hope while you figured out how to be a man instead of a title. And the first time someone challenges you, you fold. You prove them right. The words hit like a fist to the gut. Thomas Pembroke is a bully, Rowan said quietly. Thomas Pembroke is a farmer who's watched 3 generations of Blackthorns take his work for granted. He's angry. He has a right to be. Mara's voice softened slightly. But he's also negotiating. Everything he asked for was reasonable. You could have given him half of it and kept him happy. I can't look weak. You already do. She turned away. Now you get to choose whether you stay that way. She left him standing alone in the office. Rowan sank into the chair and put his head in his hands. She was right. He knew she was right. But admitting it felt like swallowing glass. Twat. 3 days later, the fever came to the village. It started with the Carver family, mother, father, 3 children under 10. The oldest boy came down with it first. High fever, chills, a cough that sounded like tearing cloth. Within 2 days, the whole family was sick. Then it spread. Mrs. Harris's grandson, the blacksmith's wife, 2 families on the east end of the village. The fever burned through them fast and vicious, leaving people shaking and delirious. The vicar sent word to the manor. Mara was out the door before Rowan even understood what was happening. Where are you going? He called after her. To help. She was already mounting her horse, a bag of supplies tied to the saddle. You can't. It's contagious. Then I'll be careful. She looked down at him. Are you coming or not? He hesitated. Diseases like this killed. He'd seen it before. Whole households wiped out, bodies buried in mass graves. If you're afraid, stay here, Mara said. There was no judgment in her voice, just fact. But I'm going. She rode off. Rowan stood in the courtyard, watching her disappear down the road. Then he went inside, grabbed his coat, and followed. The village was quieter than he'd ever heard it. No children playing, no women gossiping by the well, just closed doors and the smell of sickness hanging in the air. He found Mara at the Carver house. Inside it was dim and close. The mother lay in bed, her face flushed and slick with sweat. The 3 children were huddled together on a pallet by the fire. The father sat in a chair, coughing into a rag. Mara was kneeling beside the mother, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. How long has she been like this? Mara asked the father. 2 days. His voice was hoarse. Can't keep anything down. Water, food, nothing stays. The children? The oldest is worst. The little ones are just starting. Mara stood and moved to the children. She checked each one methodically. Foreheads, pulses, breathing. Her face was calm, but Rowan saw the tension in her shoulders. They need fluids, she said. Small amounts, constantly. If they can't keep water down, try broth, just a spoonful at a time. She turned to the father. Can you do that? He nodded weakly. Good. I'll come back this evening with more supplies. She looked at Rowan. Help me with the water. They spent the next hour hauling buckets from the well, boiling water over the fire, preparing broth from the supplies Mara had brought. She moved with quick efficiency, never wasting emotion. Why are you doing this? Rowan asked as they worked. Because they're sick and I can help. You could get sick too. I could. She didn't look at him. But if everyone who could help decides to stay safe, who's left? They moved to the next house, then the next. By the time the sun set, they'd visited 8 families. Mara checked every patient, gave instructions, left supplies. She didn't flinch from the sickness, didn't hesitate. Rowan tried to keep up, but his hand shook as he touched fevered foreheads. The smell of illness made his stomach turn. At the Harris house, he nearly broke. Mrs. Harris's grandson, the boy she'd mentioned when they talked outside the Grange Hall, was barely conscious. His breathing was shallow and fast. His skin was gray. "He's dying," Mrs. Harris whispered. Tears ran down her weathered face. "Isn't he?" Mara knelt beside the bed. She pressed her fingers to the boy's throat, feeling for his pulse. Her face was unreadable. "Maybe," she said quietly. "But not today." She worked for an hour trying to get water into him, keeping him cool, monitoring his breathing. Rowan watched from the corner, feeling useless. "Why aren't you helping?" Mrs. Harris asked him. "I don't know what to do." "Then learn." She pointed at Mara. "She's been doing this for 3 days straight, hasn't slept, hasn't stopped. The least you can do is hand her a damn cloth." Rowan stepped forward and started helping. By the time they left, the boy's fever had dropped slightly. Not much, but enough. Outside, Mara leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. "How many more?" Rowan asked. 4 houses. Maybe 5. She straightened. "We should keep going. You need to rest. People are dying." She looked at him. "Rest can wait." They worked through the night. The fever kept spreading. Within a week, half the village was sick. The vicar collapsed while giving last rites. 2 children died. An old man. The blacksmith's wife held on for days, then slipped away in the night. Mara barely slept. Rowan watched her push herself past exhaustion, moving from house to house, checking patients, organizing care. She taught the healthy ones how to manage symptoms, how to prevent spread, how to recognize when someone was beyond saving. She never stopped. Rowan tried to help, but he wasn't good at it. His hands were clumsy. He couldn't stay calm the way she did. Watching people suffer made him angry and helpless. On the 8th day, Mrs. Calloway came to find him. "Sir, there's a problem." He looked up from the ledgers he'd been trying to focus on. "What now?" "There's talk in the village. Some of the families, the ones who aren't sick, they're saying the fever came from the manor, that it's a punishment. A punishment for what? For you evicting the Pembrokes, for breaking the old agreements. They're saying the land is cursed because you broke faith." Rowan stood up. "That's superstitious nonsense." "Maybe, but they believe it, and they're scared." Mrs. Calloway's face was tight. "Some of them are talking about leaving, taking their families and going before the fever takes them too." "Where's Mara?" "Still in the village." He found her at the Carver house again. The family was recovering slowly. The mother was sitting up. The children were playing quietly by the fire. Mara was outside washing her hands in a bucket of cold water. She looked like she might fall over. "We need to talk," Rowan said. She dried her hands on her skirt. "About what?" "The tenants think the fever is my fault. They think I cursed the land by evicting the Pembrokes." "Did you?" "What? No, it's a disease. It's not—" "I know that, but they don't." She leaned against the wall. "Fear makes people look for reasons. You gave them one when you threw out the most respected family on the estate. So what do I do?" "Fix it." "How?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Ask Thomas Pembroke to come back. Publicly. In front of everyone. Admit you were wrong and offer him better terms." I can't." "You can, and you will. Because if you don't, this estate falls apart. People are already talking about leaving. If they go, we lose everything. The land, the income, the community, everything I've built, everything you're trying to save." Her voice was hard. "Your pride isn't worth that. It'll make me look weak. You already look weak. This is how you start looking strong." She pushed off the wall. "Real strength isn't refusing to bend. It's knowing when to bend so you don't break." She walked away, leaving him standing in the cold. Rowan rode to the Pembroke farm the next morning. Thomas Pembroke was loading a wagon when he arrived. His sons were helping, their faces hard and unfriendly. "Come to throw us off sooner?" Pembroke asked without looking up. "No." Rowan dismounted. "I came to ask you to stay." Pembroke stopped, turned. What? I was wrong. The eviction was a mistake. I let my pride make the decision instead of my sense. The words felt like pulling nails. I'm asking you to tear up the eviction notice and stay. Pembroke studied him. Under what terms? The ones you asked for. Drainage repairs, fence maintenance, a rent reduction for 3 years. And what do you get out of it? I get to keep a good tenant, and maybe I get to stop making the same stupid mistakes my father made. Rowan met his eyes. I'm trying to be better than I was. This is part of that. Pembroke was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we'll stay. Good. Rowan started to turn away, then stopped. There's one more thing. I need you to come to the village square tomorrow at noon. Why? Because people need to see us together. They need to know the estate isn't cursed, that we're working together instead of tearing each other apart. Rowan's throat was tight. They need to see that I can admit when I'm wrong. Pembroke's expression shifted. Something that might have been respect. I'll be there. What? The next day, half the village gathered in the square despite the cold. Rowan stood on the steps of the Grange Hall with Thomas Pembroke beside him. Mara stood off to the side, her face unreadable. Most of you know what happened, Rowan began, his voice carried across the square. I evicted the Pembrokes. I was angry, and I was proud, and I made a bad decision. I'm here to say I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This estate doesn't belong to me just because my name is on a piece of paper. It belongs to all of us. Everyone who works the land, everyone who lives here, everyone who's invested their lives in making this place survive. He looked at Pembroke. Thomas Pembroke and his family have been part of that for 40 years. They've earned the right to be heard. I should have listened. I didn't. That ends now. He turned to Pembroke and held out his hand. I'm asking you to stay, under fair terms, as partners, not as lord and tenant. Pembroke looked at his hand, then at the crowd, then back at Rowan. He shook. The crowd exhaled. Some people clapped. Others just nodded, satisfied. There's one more thing, Rowan continued. The fever. Some of you think it's connected to what I did, that the land is cursed. It's not. Diseases happen. People get sick. It's not punishment. It's not fate. It's just life in a hard place. He pointed at Mara. But if you want to know why we're still standing, why people are recovering, why we haven't lost half the village, look at her, Mara Blackthorne, my wife. She's the one who's been fighting this fever since the first day, going house to house, teaching you how to care for your sick, saving lives while I was figuring out how to be useful. Mara's eyes widened slightly. She's the reason we're going to survive this. Not me, her. He looked back at the crowd. So if you're looking for someone to trust, look at her. She's earned it. The square was silent. Then Mrs. Harris started clapping. Slowly, others joined. Within moments, the whole crowd was applauding. Mara stood frozen, her face flushed. Rowan stepped down and walked to her. What was that? She asked quietly. The truth. He met her eyes. You saved this place. They should know it. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's why you deserve it. For the first time since he'd met her, Mara looked uncertain, vulnerable. Thank you, she said finally. He nodded. The crowd began to disperse. People approached Mara, shaking her hand, thanking her. She handled it awkwardly but graciously. Rowan watched from the steps. He'd spent his whole life trying to earn respect through his name, his title, his bloodline. She'd earned it by showing up, by caring when it would have been easier not to. He had a lot to learn, but for the first time he thought he might actually be able to. And that night the fever broke in the Harris house. The grandson woke up, asked for water, and fell back into a natural sleep. Mrs. Harris wept with relief. Mara sat with her for an hour, making sure the boy stayed stable. Then she walked back to the manor through the snow. Rowan was waiting in the entry hall when she arrived. How is he? He asked. He'll live. She pulled off her cloak, her hands shaking from cold or exhaustion or both. Most of them will now. We're past the worst. Because of you. Because we got lucky. She sat down on the stairs, too tired to make it any further. Luck and stubbornness. Rowan sat beside her. They were quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? For all of it. For marrying you and then abandoning you. For treating you like you were less than nothing. For making you fight alone. He looked at his hands. You deserved better. Yes, I did. Her voice was soft but firm. But you're trying now. That counts for something. Does it count enough? She turned to look at him. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But there was something else there too. Something that hadn't been before. Ask me again in a year, she said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a chance. Rowan took it. Then I'll spend the year earning a better answer. Mara almost smiled. Then she stood up, swaying slightly. I need to sleep before I fall over. Let me help you. I can walk, Rowan. I'm not broken. But she didn't pull away when he steadied her. They climbed the stairs together in silence. At the top, she paused. The Pembrokes. That took courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. She looked at him directly. But you did it. That matters. She went to her room and closed the door. Rowan stood in the hallway, listening to the old house settle around him. Somewhere in the village, people were recovering. The fever was retreating. The estate was holding together. And for the first time since his father died, Rowan felt like maybe, just maybe, he was where he was supposed to be. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Winter had a long way to go yet, but they'd made it through the worst. At least, he thought they had. Then, 3 days later, a rider came from the settlement 15 miles north. The message was short. The fever had reached them. Worse than here. People were dying by the dozens. They needed help. They needed supplies. They needed someone who knew how to fight it. They needed Mara. The rider stood in the manor's entry hall, hat in hand, looking exhausted and desperate. We heard what she did here, he said, how she saved people. We need her. Please. Mara stood at the top of the stairs listening. Rowan looked up at her, saw the calculation in her eyes, the decision already forming. You can't go, he said. You've barely recovered yourself. You'll die if you… People are dying now. She came down the stairs. I can help. It's not your responsibility. Then whose is it? She looked at the rider. How bad? Bad, ma'am. 20 dead already. More sick every day. We don't know what to do. She turned to Rowan. I'm going. Like hell you are. His voice was hard. I won't allow it. Her eyes flashed. You won't allow it? No, I'm your husband. I'm the Lord here, and I'm telling you to stay. And I'm telling you I'm going anyway. She stepped closer. You don't own me, Rowan. You never did. I stayed here and built this place because I chose to. Now I'm choosing to help those people. You can't stop me. I can forbid you. Try it. Her voice was ice. Lock me in my room. Chain the doors. See how long that lasts. See how the village reacts when they find out you imprisoned the woman who saved them. She turned to the rider. Give me an hour to pack. I'll ride back with you. The rider nodded and left. Rowan grabbed her arm. You'll die there. Maybe, she pulled free. But I'll die trying to save people instead of hiding in a manor pretending to be safe. That's worth something. Not to me. She stopped, looked at him, really looked. Why do you care? She asked quietly. 2 months ago, you didn't even remember I existed. Now you want to keep me locked up for my own safety? Why? He didn't have an answer. Or he did, but it was too big and too complicated and too raw to put into words. Because I need you here, he said finally. The estate needs you. I need you. Then come with me. The words hung between them. What? Rowan asked. Come with me. Help me. We'll go together. Her eyes were fierce. Or admit you're still a coward who only cares about himself. It was a challenge, a test, and Rowan knew, standing there in the entry hall with the winter wind howling outside, that this was the moment that would define everything that came after. He could say no, could order her to stay, could watch her leave and spend the rest of his life wondering if she'd come back. Or he could go, into the sickness, into the danger, into something that might kill them both. All right, he heard himself say. I'll go. Mara's expression shifted. Surprise, then something that might have been respect. Good, she said. Pack warm. It's going to be worse than here. She went upstairs to prepare. Rowan stood alone in the entry hall, trying to understand what he'd just agreed to. He was going to ride into a plague settlement with a woman he barely knew, risking his life for people who meant nothing to him. And somehow, for the first time in his entire life, it felt like the right choice. They rode out an hour before dawn. The settlement was called Brennan's Cross, nothing more than a cluster of timber houses and mining shacks built around a crossroads where two trade routes met. The rider, a man named Collins who ran the general store, led them through snow that came up past the horses' knees. The wind was brutal, cutting through every layer of clothing. Rowan had packed light, medical supplies, blankets, his warmest coat. Mara rode beside him in silence, her face set and pale in the pre-dawn darkness. She hadn't said a word since they left the manor. "How far?" Rowan called over the wind. 4 hours in good weather, Collins shouted back. 6 in this. It took 7. By the time they crested the final ridge and looked down at Brennan's Cross, the sun was high and cold. The settlement looked worse than Rowan had imagined. Smoke rose from only a handful of chimneys. The streets were empty. A wagon sat abandoned in the middle of the road, one wheel broken. "How many people live here?" Mara asked. "About 300, Collins said. "Maybe less now." They rode down into the settlement. The smell hit first. Sickness and death and human waste. Rowan pressed his sleeve to his nose. Beside him, Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Collins led them to a large building at the center of the crossroads, a trading post that had been converted into a makeshift hospital. Inside, the floor was covered with pallets. Bodies lay everywhere, some moving, some still, too many still. A woman in a blood-stained apron looked up as they entered. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow. "You the one from Ashford Manor?" she asked Mara. "Yes." "Thank the—" She stopped herself. "We didn't think you'd come." "I'm here now." Mara set down her bags. "What are we dealing with?" "Same fever as you had, but worse, faster. People go from healthy to dead in 3 days." The woman's voice cracked. "We've lost 50 already, more dying every hour." Mara moved through the room, checking patients with quick efficiency. Rowan followed, trying not to look at the faces. Some were children. One couldn't have been more than 4 years old. "They're dehydrated," Mara said to the woman. "Starving. Half of them have secondary infections from lying in filth. When's the last time these pallets were changed? We don't have clean ones." "Then we make them. Tear up blankets, sheets, anything. Get me boiling water, lots of it." She turned to Rowan. "Start checking pulses. Anyone who's already gone, move them outside. We need the space." "Move the bodies?" "Yes, now." He'd never touched a dead person before. His hands shook as he knelt beside the first one. An old man, his skin cold and waxy. Rowan checked for breath, found none, and had to force himself to grab the man's shoulders. The body was heavier than he expected, stiffer. He dragged it toward the door, trying not to think about the fact that this had been a person. Someone's father, maybe. Someone's friend. By the time he'd moved 6 bodies outside, he was shaking. Mara found him leaning against the wall, breathing hard. "You all right?" she asked. "No." "Good. Use it. Fear keeps you careful." She handed him a rag. "Wash your hands, then come help me with the living ones." They worked for 18 hours straight. Mara taught the handful of healthy people how to manage symptoms, how to get fluids into patients who couldn't keep anything down, how to recognize when someone was too far gone to save. She was relentless, moving from patient to patient, never stopping, never slowing. Rowan tried to keep up. He held down thrashing patients while Mara forced water between their lips. He changed fouled bedding. He cleaned wounds. He watched people die and kept working because there were others who might not. By the time full dark fell, he understood why Mara had looked so exhausted back in their village. This work didn't just drain you physically, it carved something out of your soul. "We're not winning," he said to her during a brief rest. They were sitting outside the trading post, backs against the wall, too tired to stand. "No," Mara agreed. "We're just slowing how fast we lose." "Then why are we here?" She looked at him. Because slowing it down means some people live who would have died. That's worth it. Is it? For this? He gestured at the settlement. These people don't know us, don't owe us anything. We could die here for nothing. Or we could die here for something. She stood up. That's the choice. Make it. She went back inside. Rowan sat alone in the cold for another moment. Then he followed. On the third day, a man named Ridley showed up. He was tall, well-dressed, riding a good horse with a rifle strapped to his saddle. He dismounted in front of the trading post and walked inside like he owned the place. Rowan was wrapping a child's infected arm when Ridley's shadow fell across him. "Who the hell are you?" Ridley demanded. Rowan looked up. "Rowan Blackthorne, from Ashford Manor. The Lord playing doctor." Ridley's lip curled. "Touching commoners. How noble." "Who are you?" "James Ridley. I run the mining operation north of here. These are my workers you're wasting time on." Rowan stood slowly. "Your workers?" "That's right, and I want them back in the mines. We're behind on quota." From across the room, Mara's voice cut through the noise. "These people are dying." Ridley turned to look at her. His eyes swept over her dismissively. "And when they're done dying, the healthy ones get back to work. That's how this works." "No." Mara walked toward him. "That's not how this works. These people are sick. They need rest. They need care. They don't need to be underground breaking rocks." "I don't remember asking your opinion, woman. I don't remember caring whether you did." Ridley's face darkened. "Listen carefully. I have contracts, deadlines, investors. If this settlement doesn't produce, everyone here loses their jobs, their homes, everything. So yes, they're going back to work, whether you like it or not." "They'll die if they do," Mara said flatly. "Some might, most won't. That's acceptable loss." Rowan stepped between them. "Get out." Ridley looked at him like he was something stuck to his boot. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Get out. This building is a hospital now, not your recruiting office. You don't have the authority. I'm a landowner. She's my wife. We're providing medical care. That gives us authority over who comes and goes in this building." Rowan's voice was hard. "You want your workers back? Fine. Wait until they're healthy enough to choose for themselves. Until then, leave." Ridley smiled. It wasn't friendly. "You're making a mistake, Blackthorne." "Probably, but it's mine to make." Ridley left. But the look on his face promised this wasn't over. Mara watched him go, then turned to Rowan. "That was stupid." "I know. He's going to cause problems." "I know that too." Rowan sat down heavily on a crate. "But he was wrong, and someone needed to say it." For the first time in days, Mara looked at him with something that might have been approval. "Maybe you're learning after all." Ridley came back the next morning with 12 men. They weren't miners. They were enforcers, big, armed, the kind of men who got paid to make problems disappear. They formed a line outside the trading post, blocking the entrance. Rowan was inside when Collins ran in, breathless. "Ridley's outside. He's got men. He says he's shutting down the hospital and taking his workers back to the mines." Mara set down the bandage she was wrapping. "How many men?" 12, maybe more. "Armed?" "Clubs, a few knives." Rowan stood up. "I'll talk to him." "And say what?" Mara asked. "Please don't. He's not here to negotiate." "Then what do you suggest?" She looked around the room at the sick people lying on pallets, at the handful of healthy volunteers trying to keep them alive, at the exhausted woman in the blood-stained apron who hadn't slept in 4 days. "We don't let him in," Mara said. "How?" "We block the door. We tell him no. And we mean it." Rowan stared at her. "There's 12 of us and maybe 5 of us who can stand. They'll break through in minutes. Then we make those minutes count." She looked at Collins. "Get everyone who can move to the front of the building. Anyone who can hold something heavy. We're not fighting. We're just showing him it won't be easy." "You're insane," Rowan said. "Probably." She started moving toward the door. "Coming?" He followed because he didn't know what else to do. Outside, Ridley stood with his men behind him. He looked amused. "This is your defense? A sick woman and a failed lord?" "This is our hospital," Mara said clearly. "You're not taking anyone from here." "I'm taking my workers. They signed contracts. Contracts don't mean anything if they're dead. She stepped forward. You want them back so badly? Fine. Wait 3 more days, let them recover. Then they can choose whether to go back to your mines or find work somewhere else. They don't get to choose. They work for me. They work for wages. If someone else offers better, they can leave. That's how employment works. Ridley's smile faded. You're offering them jobs? I'm offering them options. There's a difference. Behind Mara, the volunteers from the settlement were gathering. Not many, maybe 8 people total, but they stood firm, blocking the entrance. This is your last chance, Ridley said. Move aside or we move you. No, Mara said simply. Ridley nodded to his men. They started forward. Rowan's heart hammered. This was it. They were going to get beaten, maybe killed, over people they barely knew. It was the stupidest thing he'd ever been part of. Then someone shouted from behind Ridley's line. What the hell is going on here? A new group of riders was approaching, 10 men on horseback, led by someone Rowan recognized. Thomas Pembroke. Ridley turned. This doesn't concern you, old man. The hell it doesn't. Pembroke dismounted. Behind him came his 3 sons, plus farmers from half a dozen estates Rowan knew by sight. We heard there was trouble in Brennan's Cross. Heard someone was trying to drag sick people back to work. Thought we'd come see for ourselves. This is my business. Not anymore. Pembroke walked past Ridley and stood beside Mara. This woman saved lives in our village, taught our children, fixed our land. When we heard she came here to help, we figured the least we could do was back her up. The other farmers formed a line. Suddenly, Ridley's 12 men were facing 20. Ridley looked from Pembroke to Mara to Rowan. His face was red with rage. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe, Mara replied, but not today. Ridley and his men left. The volunteers behind Mara sagged with relief. Some started crying. Collins clapped Rowan on the shoulder so hard he stumbled. Pembroke looked at Mara. You all right? I am now. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Mrs. Harris. She's the one who rode out and told us what was happening. He glanced at Rowan. Guess you're not completely useless after all. Rowan was too stunned to respond. Mara turned to the farmers. We need help. Medical supplies, clean water, food, blankets. Can you... Already on it, one of them said. We brought 2 wagons full. Figured you'd need them. You figured right. They unloaded supplies while Mara organized distribution. Rowan watched her direct people with calm authority. Watched the farmers, men who would have laughed at a woman giving orders 6 months ago, follow her instructions without question. She'd earned this. Every bit of it. And he'd almost cost her life by trying to stop her from coming. The fever broke over the next week. Not all at once. Not cleanly. People still died. But the wave crested and began to recede. The survivors grew stronger. The settlement started to breathe again. Mara worked until she collapsed. Rowan found her asleep on the floor of the trading post, her head resting on a folded blanket, too exhausted to make it to an actual bed. He covered her with his coat and let her sleep for 12 hours straight. When she woke, she looked around the nearly empty building. Most of the sick had recovered enough to go home. Only a handful remained, and they were stable. We did it, she said quietly. You did it, Rowan corrected. I just tried not to get in the way. She sat up slowly, wincing. You were useful. That's more than I expected. High praise. It's honest. She stood, wobbling slightly. Rowan caught her elbow. She didn't pull away. How many did we lose? 38, out of about 80 sick. She closed her eyes. Too many. Less than would have died without you. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, it didn't. They walked outside together. The settlement was coming back to life. Smoke rose from most of the chimneys now. People were moving through the streets. A group of children played in the snow. Collins approached them, hat in hand. I wanted to thank you both. Before you leave. We're not leaving yet, Mara said. Not until everyone's stable. They are. Thanks to you. He shifted his weight. There's something else. The settlement's been talking about Ridley, about the mines. What about them? Rowan asked. Most folks don't want to go back, not after what he tried to pull. But we need work. We need income. We're wondering, He looked at Mara. You said something about options. Did you mean it? What kind of options? Mara asked carefully. Some of us know trades, carpentry, blacksmithing. There's good timber north of here, stone quarries. We could make something that isn't just breaking our backs for Ridley's profit. He paused. But we'd need backing. Someone willing to invest, someone we trust. Mara looked at Rowan. He knew what she was thinking. The estate barely had enough to sustain itself. Investing in a new venture here would be a massive risk. If it failed, they'd lose everything. But these people had fought for them, had stood with them when Ridley came, had trusted Mara when they had no reason to. How much would you need? Rowan heard himself ask. Collins named a figure. It was less than Rowan expected, but more than they could safely spare. Give me a day to think about it, Rowan said. Collins nodded and left. Mara sat down on the steps of the trading post. You can't say yes. Why not? Because we can't afford it. The estate's barely stable. One bad harvest and we're finished. If you invest here and it fails, then we fail. Rowan sat beside her. But if we don't help them, they'll end up back in Ridley's mines. Or worse. They stood with us. Don't we owe them something? Owing someone and having the resources to help are different things. I know. He was quiet for a moment. But I'm tired of making decisions based on fear. My father did that. Look where it got him. Look where it got me. He looked at her. You came here knowing you might die. You did it anyway because it was right. Maybe I should try doing something right too. Mara studied his face. You've changed. So have you. You used to hide. Now you lead. I didn't have a choice. Neither do I. Not anymore. He stood up. I'm going to tell Collins yes. You can disagree. But I'm doing it anyway. She stood too. For a long moment she just looked at him. Then she nodded. All right. Yes. Yes? You're right. We owe them. And if we're going to fail, we might as well fail trying to do something decent. She almost smiled. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't negotiate a terrible deal. They found Collins an hour later and told him yes. The settlement erupted in celebration. That night they held a feast, small, improvised, cobbled together from whatever people could spare, but it was real, joyful, hopeful. Rowan sat at a long table listening to people talk about plans for the future. Timber operations, a blacksmith's cooperative, a trading route that would bypass Ridley's mines entirely. Mara sat beside him, quiet but present. When someone thanked her, she deflected. When they praised her, she changed the subject. But Rowan could see she was listening, absorbing, storing it all away. Later, when the crowd had thinned and most people had gone home, they walked through the empty settlement together. Do you think it'll work? Rowan asked. The investment? I don't know. Maybe. She pulled her coat tighter. But even if it fails, we tried. That's more than most people do. They stopped at the edge of the settlement, looking out at the dark forest beyond. I need to tell you something, Rowan said. What? When I married you, I thought I was getting a burden. Something I had to carry to save my land. I was wrong. He turned to face her. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I don't deserve you, but I'm going to try to. Mara was silent for a long time. You're trying, she said finally. That's more than I expected, more than most men would do. Is it enough? I don't know yet. She looked at him directly. Ask me again in a year. Maybe I'll have an answer. It was the same thing she'd said before, but this time it felt different. Less like a dismissal, more like a promise. They started walking back toward the building where they'd been staying. Then a shout cut through the night. Fire! They turned. Flames were rising from the western edge of the settlement, high and fast, spreading from building to building. Rowan's stomach dropped. Where's that coming from? The supply warehouse. Mara was already running. That's where we stored everything. Medicine, food, blankets, everything. They reached the warehouse just as the roof collapsed. The heat was unbearable. Inside, supplies worth months of work were burning. People were gathering, shouting, trying to organize bucket lines. But it was too late. The building was lost. Collins stumbled out of the crowd, his face black with soot. It was set. I saw someone running from the building right before it went up. Who? Rowan demanded. Couldn't see, but I'd bet my life it was one of Ridley's men. Mara stood frozen, watching the flames consume everything they'd worked for. This is my fault, she said quietly. I pushed back. I challenged him. Now he's taking it out on the settlement. No. Rowan grabbed her shoulders. This is on him, not you. Tell that to the people who'll starve because we just lost all the supplies. She was right. The fire had destroyed more than a building. It had destroyed their lifeline. Without those supplies, the settlement wouldn't make it through winter, and Ridley knew it. Rowan looked at the burning building, then at Mara's devastated face, then at the crowd of people who had trusted them. He made a decision. I'm going after him, Rowan said. What? Ridley did this. He's going to pay for it. Rowan started toward the stables. I'm going to his mine. I'm going to make him answer for what he's done. Rowan, wait. But he was already moving, fueled by rage and guilt and something hot and reckless he couldn't name. He saddled his horse and rode out into the night. Mara stood in the firelight, watching him go. Behind her, the warehouse burned. And deep in the forest, something waited. Ridley's mining camp was 3 hours north, carved into the side of a mountain. Rowan rode through the gates just after midnight. Guards tried to stop him, but he pushed past them, heading straight for the main office. He found Ridley inside, drinking brandy like nothing had happened. Blackthorn. Ridley set down his glass. What a surprise. You burned the warehouse. Did I? Interesting theory. Can you prove it? Rowan grabbed him by the front of his coat and slammed him against the wall. People are going to die because of what you did. Children, families, people who have nothing to do with your grudge. Ridley smiled. Then maybe you shouldn't have interfered. Rowan's fist connected with Ridley's jaw before he realized he was swinging. Ridley went down hard. Blood poured from his split lip. The door burst open. 4 guards rushed in, grabbing Rowan and dragging him back. Assaulting me on my own property, Ridley said, standing and wiping blood from his mouth. That's a crime, Blackthorn. I could have you arrested. Or worse. Do it. I don't care. Oh, I won't. Ridley straightened his coat. Because watching you fail is far more satisfying. That settlement will collapse without supplies. Those people will come crawling back to my mines, and you'll have to live knowing you couldn't save them. He nodded to the guards. Throw him out. They dragged Rowan outside and threw him into the mud. He lay there for a moment, breathing hard, tasting blood. Then he got up, climbed back on his horse, and rode back to Brennan's Cross. He'd failed. Again. The settlement was going to die, and it was his fault for not being strong enough, smart enough, good enough. By the time he reached the settlement, the sun was rising. The warehouse was a smoking ruin, and Mara was waiting for him. She looked at his bruised knuckles, his muddy clothes, his defeated expression. Did you kill him? She asked. No. Did you accomplish anything? No. She was quiet for a moment. Then she grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the trading post. Inside, the entire settlement had gathered, every person who could walk. Tell them, Mara said. Tell them what? What Ridley said, what he's planning, all of it. Rowan looked at the crowd, at their tired, hopeful faces, and he told them everything. When he finished, silence filled the room. Then Colin stepped forward. So what do we do? Mara moved to the center of the room. We fight. How? Someone asked. He burned our supplies. We have nothing. We have each other. Mara's voice was clear and strong. Ridley thinks he can starve us out, force us back to his mines. He thinks we're weak, desperate, that we'll give up. She looked around the room. He's wrong. We're going to rebuild. We're going to source new supplies. We're going to create trade routes that don't go through his territory. We're going to build something he can't control. And we're going to do it together. That'll take months, someone said. We don't have months. Then we make it work in weeks. She turned to Rowan. You offered backing. Can you get us supplies, fast? I can try. Not good enough. Can you do it? He looked at her fierce, determined face, at the people watching him. Yes, he said. I can do it. Then do it. Ride back to Ashford. Strip everything we can spare. Bring it here." She turned back to the crowd. "The rest of us start organizing. Work crews, supply lines, defense rotations in case Ridley comes back. We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever." The room erupted in agreement. Rowan pulled Mara aside. "This is insane. We can't." "Yes, we can." She gripped his arm. "Stop thinking about what we'll lose and start thinking about what we'll gain. These people believe in us. Don't prove them wrong." She walked away, already organizing, already leading. Rowan stood alone for a moment, then he went to find his horse. He had supplies to gather, a settlement to save, and for the first time in his life, a purpose that wasn't about himself. He rode out as the sun climbed higher. Behind him, Brennan's Cross began to rebuild. And ahead of him, Ashford Manor waited. But between here and there, in the deep woods where no one saw, another rider watched him pass, then turned and rode hard toward the capital, carrying news that would change everything. Rowan rode for 12 straight hours, stopping only to water his horse. By the time Ashford Manor came into view against the winter sky, his hands were numb and his body ached from the saddle. But he didn't slow down. Garrett met him in the courtyard, eyes wide. "Sir, we didn't expect—" "Get Mrs. Calloway. Get everyone. We're stripping the storage rooms." Rowan dismounted, stumbling slightly. "Medical supplies, blankets, food stores, everything we can spare without starving ourselves. Load it into wagons. We leave at dawn." "For Brennan's Cross?" "Yes?" Garrett hesitated. "Sir, if we give away that much, we'll be cutting it close for winter. If anything goes wrong, then we'll deal with it." Rowan headed for the house. "Get it done." Within an hour, the manor was in controlled chaos. Mrs. Calloway directed servants through the storage rooms, making lists, prioritizing supplies. Garrett organized wagons and drivers. Even the stable boys pitched in, hauling crates and barrels. Rowan worked alongside them, exhaustion forgotten. He was measuring out grain stores when Thomas Pembroke walked into the storage room. "Heard you were back," Pembroke said. "Heard you're planning something stupid." "Depends on your definition of stupid. Giving away half your winter supplies to save a settlement that might not survive anyway." Pembroke crossed his arms. "That qualifies." Rowan straightened. "Then why are you here?" "Because my daughter-in-law told me what happened. The fire. Ridley's games. Your wife standing up to armed men." Pembroke's expression softened slightly. "That woman's got more spine than most men I know, including me. So I figured if she thinks Brennan's Cross is worth saving, maybe it is." "And?" "And I brought you this." Pembroke pulled a leather purse from his coat. The weight of it was unmistakable. Coins, a lot of them. "It's not much, collection from the families around here. Everyone who remembers what Mara did for us. We figured she needs help now, it's only fair." Rowan took the purse. It was heavier than he expected. "Thomas, don't get sentimental, just use it right." Pembroke turned to leave, then paused. "Your wife's making you better, Blackthorn. Don't waste it." He left. Rowan stood alone in the storage room, holding the purse. These were farmers, tenants, people who barely had enough for themselves. And they'd given what they could because Mara had shown them kindness. She'd built something here without even realizing it. A community that cared, that helped, that remembered. He opened the purse and counted the coins. Enough to buy another wagon of supplies. Maybe two. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things. But it was everything. They left at dawn with 3 wagons fully loaded. Rowan drove the first wagon himself. Garrett took the second. A farmer named Wilson, who'd volunteered, drove the third. The journey back to Brennan's Cross took 14 hours through worsening weather. Snow started falling around midday and didn't stop. By the time they reached the settlement, it was full dark and the temperature had dropped below freezing. Mara was waiting in the street, wrapped in a cloak that was too thin for the cold. When she saw the wagons, something in her face shifted. Relief. Hope. Maybe both. "You came back," she said as Rowan climbed down. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure." She looked at the wagons. "How much did you bring?" "Everything we could spare, plus donations from the village." He handed her the purse from Pembroke. "They remembered what you did for them. They wanted to help." Mara opened the purse. Her hand shook slightly as she counted the coins. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "I didn't..." She stopped, started again. I didn't think anyone cared. They care. Because you did first. Rowan moved closer. Now let's make sure these supplies count. They spent the next 3 hours unloading and organizing. The settlement had transformed in the 2 days Rowan had been gone. Work crews had cleared the burned warehouse site. New storage buildings were under construction, smaller, spread out so one fire couldn't destroy everything. People moved with purpose, coordinating, helping each other. Mara had done this. She'd taken devastation and turned it into organization. Collins approached them as they finished unloading the last wagon. We got word from the capital today. Rowan's stomach tightened. What kind of word? Ridley filed a complaint. Says you assaulted him. Says you're interfering with lawful business operations. Says he wants you arrested. Can he do that? Mara asked. Technically, yes, he has connections. Money. Lawyers. Collins shifted his weight. But there's something else. The complaint got noticed. People started asking questions. About working conditions in his mines. About the fever outbreak. About him trying to force sick workers back underground. Who's asking questions? Rowan demanded. Labor Guild representatives. A magistrate from the Southern District. Even a newspaper from the capital sent someone. Collins almost smiled. Ridley wanted to make you look bad. Instead, he put a spotlight on himself. Mara's eyes narrowed. Where's this reporter now? Staying at the inn. Been interviewing people all day. Good. Mara brushed snow from her coat. I want to talk to him. The reporter's name was Marcus Webb. He was young, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He sat in the corner of the inn's common room, taking notes while people told him their stories. Mara walked straight up to his table. You're the one writing about Ridley? Webb looked up. And you are? Mara Blackthorne. I'm the reason Ridley's complaint exists. Webb's eyebrows rose. He set down his pen. The woman who stood down his enforcers. I've heard the stories. They're true. All of them. She pulled out a chair and sat without waiting for an invitation. What are you writing? A piece on labor conditions in frontier mining operations. Ridley's complaint gave me an angle, but the real story is what's happening here. He gestured around the room. A settlement recovering from a plague, a woman who saved lives, a man who burned supplies out of spite. It's good material. Can you prove Ridley burned the warehouse? I have 3 witnesses who saw his men near the building before the fire. That's not proof, but it's compelling. Webb leaned forward. Why? What are you planning? I want you to write the truth, all of it. What Ridley tried to do, what this settlement is building, what happens when someone with power tries to crush people who won't bow. That's a dangerous story, Webb said. Ridley has friends. They won't like being exposed. I don't care what they like. Mara's voice was hard. They need to know they can't do this. Not here. Not anymore. Webb studied her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. She did. For 2 hours, Mara talked. She told him about the fever, the fight with Ridley, the fire, the recovery. She gave him names, dates, details. She didn't soften anything, didn't make herself the hero, just laid out the facts and let them speak. Rowan sat nearby, listening. He'd never heard her talk about their work like this. Clinical, precise, devastating in its honesty. She wasn't trying to win sympathy. She was building a case. When she finished, Webb had filled 10 pages with notes. This is good, he said quietly. This is really good. If I can verify half of it, Ridley's going to have a serious problem. Verify all of it, Mara said. I'll give you witnesses for every claim. Webb left 2 days later with enough material for a dozen articles. Rowan found Mara sitting alone by the fire that night, staring into the flames. You think it'll work? He asked. The story? I don't know. Maybe. She poked at the fire with a stick. But even if it doesn't, people will know what happened. That counts for something. You're gambling a lot on one reporter. I'm gambling on the truth. That's different. She looked at him. You were right, you know, back at the manor. When you said we should help these people, I thought you were being reckless. But you were being brave. There's a difference. Rowan sat down beside her. I'm still reckless. I know, but you're learning. She almost smiled. We both are. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the settlement slept. Tomorrow, they'd wake up and keep building, keep fighting, keep surviving. And somewhere in the capital, a story was being written that would change everything. The article hit the capital newspapers 3 weeks later. Rowan didn't see it first. Collins did, riding into Brennan's Cross with a stack of papers and a grin on his face. "You need to read this," he said, shoving the paper into Rowan's hands. The headline read, "Frontier Baron's Greed Exposed. Mine Owner Accused of Exploitation, Arson, Attempted Murder." Below it, Webb's article laid out everything: the fever outbreak, Ridley's attempt to force sick workers back to the mines, the fire, witness testimony from a dozen settlers, even a statement from a former mine foreman who'd quit after seeing conditions underground. It was devastating, and it was spreading. Within days, other newspapers picked up the story. The Labor Guild launched an investigation. Investors started pulling out of Ridley's mining operation. Local magistrates opened inquiries into the fire. Ridley tried to fight back. He hired lawyers, issued denials, claimed the witnesses were lying. But the truth was too solid, too well documented, too damning. 2 weeks after the article published, the magistrate's office sent a representative to Brennan's Cross to verify claims. He interviewed witnesses, inspected the burned warehouse site, reviewed medical records from the fever outbreak. Mara gave him everything: patient lists, supply inventories, testimony from survivors. She walked him through the timeline, step by step, moment by moment. The representative took notes and said nothing. When he left, Mara turned to Rowan. "Do you think it was enough?" "I don't know." They found out 4 days later. The magistrate's office issued a formal censure against Ridley. His mining operation was placed under investigation. He was fined for negligent endangerment, and the settlement at Brennan's Cross was officially recognized as an independent community with the right to self-governance. It wasn't a complete victory. Ridley was still wealthy, still powerful, still dangerous. But his reputation was shattered. His investors were fleeing, his workers were leaving in droves, and Brennan's Cross was free. The celebration lasted 3 days. People poured into the streets, laughing, crying, embracing. The settlement that had been dying 2 months ago was alive again, thriving even. New buildings were going up. Trade routes were being established. Children were going to school in a real schoolhouse instead of a converted barn. Mara stood on the steps of the new community hall, watching people dance in the snow. Rowan found her there, quiet and apart from the celebration. "You did this," he said. "All of it. We did this. You, me, Collins, Pembroke, everyone who helped." She looked at him. "I couldn't have done it alone." "But you started it. You saw what needed to be done and you did it, even when it was dangerous, even when I tried to stop you." He moved closer. "You're the bravest person I know." "I'm just stubborn." "You're both." He took her hand. "Mara, She pulled him into the crowd before he could finish. They danced badly, stumbling over each other's feet, laughing when they nearly fell. Around them, the settlement celebrated. Music played. Children ran wild. Families held each other close. For the first time in months, there was joy. And in the middle of it all, Rowan looked at his wife, this small, fierce, relentless woman who'd saved hundreds of lives, and felt something shift inside him. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was close. It was the beginning of it. They stayed in Brennan's Cross for another week, helping finalize the settlement's reorganization. The community elected a council. Collins became the de facto leader, though he insisted it was temporary. Work crews broke ground on a sawmill and a trading post. Families started moving in from other struggling settlements, drawn by stories of hope and fair treatment. Brennan's Cross was becoming something real, something that would last. On their final day, the council held a ceremony. Mara tried to refuse, said she didn't need recognition, that the work was its own reward, but they insisted. Collins stood in front of the gathered crowd and spoke clearly. "This settlement was dying, we all know it. The fever was killing us. Ridley was crushing us. We had no hope. Then this woman showed up and gave us a chance. She fought for us when no one else would. She stood up to power because it was right, not because it was safe. He turned to Mara. We can't repay what you've done, but we can promise you this: Brennan's Cross will remember, and we'll make sure others remember too. The crowd erupted in applause. Mara stood frozen, her face flushed. Rowan could see her fighting tears. Thank you, she managed finally. Just thank you. That night they loaded the empty wagons for the journey home. Rowan was checking harnesses when a young woman approached him. She couldn't have been more than 20, thin and tired-looking, with a baby wrapped against her chest. Mr. Blackthorne, she said hesitantly. Yes? I just wanted to say thank you. My son, he was sick, real sick. Your wife saved him. She stayed up with him all night when the fever spiked, wouldn't leave until he was stable. The woman's voice cracked. I don't have anything to give you, but I wanted you to know what she did, what she means to us. Rowan looked at the baby sleeping peacefully against her chest. What's his name? Marcus, after the reporter. She smiled slightly. Figured he earned it. He did, so did Mara. The woman nodded and walked away. Rowan stood alone in the cold, thinking about everything that had happened. About the man he'd been when he came back to Ashford, bitter, selfish, running from responsibility. About the woman he'd married without looking at her, about how wrong he'd been about everything. Mara found him an hour later, still standing by the wagons. Ready to go home? She asked. Home. The word meant something different now. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. They left Brennan's Cross at dawn, 3 empty wagons rolling back toward Ashford. Behind them, smoke rose from 100 chimneys. Children played in the streets. Life continued, stronger than before. The journey home took 2 days. They traveled in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared exhaustion and shared purpose. On the second evening, they stopped to make camp. While Garrett and Wilson tended the horses, Rowan and Mara sat by the fire. What happens now? Rowan asked. We go home. We manage the estate. We hope the investment in Brennan's Cross pays off. She poked at the fire. We keep going. That's it? What else is there? I don't know. He struggled for words. Everything's different now. You're different. I'm different. The estate, the village, Brennan's Cross, it's all different. I'm trying to figure out where I fit in all of it. Mara looked at him. You fit wherever you choose to. That's the whole point. You're not your father. You're not your title. You're just Rowan, the man who rode into a plague settlement because it was right, the man who stood up to Ridley, the man who's trying to be better. And if I fail? Then you fail. But at least you'll fail trying instead of running. She stood up. That's all anyone can do. She walked away to check on the horses. Rowan sat alone by the fire, thinking about her words. You fit wherever you choose to. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe he didn't need to fit into some predetermined role. Maybe he could just choose to be useful, choose to help, choose to keep trying even when it was hard. Maybe that was enough. Nut. They reached Ashford Manor on a clear afternoon, the sun bright against fresh snow. The manor looked different to Rowan now, less like a prison and more like a possibility. The gardens Mara had restored were buried under snow, but he could see the shapes of them, the careful paths, the pruned roses, the running fountain frozen into silence until spring. Mrs. Calloway met them at the door. Welcome home, sir, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Calloway, Mara said. How are things? Quiet, uneventful, the way they should be. She looked at them both. You look exhausted. We are, Rowan admitted. Then I'll have baths drawn and dinner prepared. You can tell us about your adventures tomorrow. She disappeared into the house. Rowan and Mara stood in the entry hall, suddenly uncertain. They'd spent weeks working side by side, fighting together, barely sleeping. Now they were home, and the familiar distance between them felt strange. Mara gestured vaguely toward the east wing. Stay, Rowan said. Then, realizing how that sounded, have dinner with me, in the dining room, like before, if you want. She studied him. All right. That evening they sat at opposite ends of the long table again. But it felt different this time, less like strangers forced into proximity and more like partners taking a break. The village will want to hear about Brennan's cross, Mara said. They'll want to know their donations made a difference. They did. We should tell them. Rowan paused. Maybe hold a gathering. Let people ask questions. Show them what we accomplished. We? Yes, we. He met her eyes. You keep trying to make this all about you. It's not. We did this together. You followed my lead. Because you were right. That doesn't diminish what we built. He set down his fork. I'm tired of pretending I did this alone or you did this alone. We're a team, whether we meant to be or not. Mara was quiet for a long time. A team. Yes. And what happens when we disagree? We argue, we figure it out, we keep going. He leaned forward. I'm not my father, Mara. I'm not going to shut you out or ignore you or treat you like you don't matter. You've proven you matter more than anyone else on this estate, including me. She looked down at her plate. You've changed. So have you. You used to hide in the East Wing. Now you lead settlements and challenge mine owners and save lives. He smiled slightly. I'm just trying to keep up. You're doing better than keeping up. She met his eyes. You're actually helpful now. High praise. It's honest. They finished dinner in companionable silence. Afterward, Mara stood to leave, but at the door she paused. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming to Brennan's cross, for backing me up, for not trying to stop me. You would have gone anyway. Yes, but it mattered that you came. She looked at him directly. It mattered that you chose to. She left before he could respond. Rowan sat alone in the dining room, feeling something warm and unfamiliar in his chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of something better. The gathering happened 3 days later. Half the village turned out, crowding into the Grange Hall to hear about Brennan's cross. Mara stood at the front, describing what they'd found, what they'd built, what the donations had accomplished. People listened, rapt. When she finished, they applauded. Then Thomas Pembroke stood up. I have something to say. The room went quiet. We all know what happened here a few months ago, Pembroke began. I challenged Mr. Blackthorne. He evicted me. We nearly tore this place apart, but then he did something I didn't expect. He admitted he was wrong. He made it right, and then he went and risked everything to help people who weren't even his responsibility. He looked at Rowan. I was wrong about you. I thought you were just another spoiled lord who'd bleed us dry and run. But you stayed. You fought. You proved you care about more than just yourself. He turned to Mara. And you're the strongest person I've ever met, man or woman. You saved this village. You saved Brennan's cross. You did it without asking for anything in return. That's real leadership. The room erupted in agreement. Rowan stood, overwhelmed. These people who'd barely respected him 6 months ago, were looking at him like he mattered, like he'd earned his place instead of just inheriting it. It was terrifying. It was incredible. After the gathering, people approached them in small groups, thanking them, asking questions about Brennan's cross, offering help if they needed it. Rowan watched Mara handle each conversation with grace and patience. She didn't take credit, didn't boast, just answered honestly and moved on. She was remarkable. And he'd almost thrown her away. That night, he found her in the garden, standing by the frozen fountain. Snow was falling lightly, dusting her hair and shoulders. You should be inside, he said. It's freezing. I needed air. It was a lot of people. She turned to face him. That went better than I expected. You were perfect. I was honest. There's a difference. She looked at the fountain. Do you remember when you first came back? You saw me out here pulling weeds. You asked Garrett who I was. I remember. I was so angry that day. Angry at you for leaving. Angry at myself for staying. Angry at everything. She touched the frozen water. But I kept working anyway, because what else was I going to do? Give up? Let everything fall apart? No, that's not who you are. I didn't know who I was back then. I was just trying to survive. She looked at him. Now I know. I'm the person who shows up, who does the work, who fights even when it's hard. That's who I've always been. I just needed a reason to prove it. And now? Now I have 100 reasons. This village, Brennan's Cross, the people who depend on us. She paused. You. The word hung in the cold air between them. Me? Rowan asked. You. You're not the man I married. That man was a coward who ran from everything. You're someone different now, someone I can work with, someone I can... She stopped, started again. Someone I can trust. Trust. Not love. Not yet. But it was more than he'd expected, more than he deserved. I'm going to keep trying, he said, to be better, to earn that trust, to be worthy of you. You're already worthy. You just didn't know it yet. She turned back to the fountain. We should go inside. We have work tomorrow. They walked back to the manor together, side by side in the falling snow. And for the first time since he'd returned, Rowan felt like he was finally home, not because of the building or the land or the title, but because of the woman beside him, the woman who'd saved him without even trying, the woman who'd become his partner, his ally, his equal, the woman who was changing everything. Inside the manor, fires burned warm. Servants moved through the halls. The estate hummed with quiet life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new battles to fight. But tonight, they'd won. Brennan's Cross was free. The village was thriving. The estate was stable. And Rowan Blackthorne, for the first time in his life, knew exactly who he wanted to be. Not a lord, not a title, just a man trying to be good enough for the woman who'd given him a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Spring came late that year. The snow held through March, burying the fields under white silence. Then, almost overnight, the world thawed. Streams rushed with meltwater. The first green shoots pushed through muddy ground. Birds returned, filling the air with sound. Rowan stood at his study window, watching workers prepare the north fields for planting. The estate had changed over the winter. New fences, repaired irrigation, tenant houses with patched roofs and solid doors. Everything Mara had started, they'd finished together. Sir, Garrett appeared in the doorway, holding an envelope. His face was tight. This just arrived, from the capital. The seal was official, heavy wax stamped with the territorial governor's crest. Rowan's stomach dropped. He broke the seal and read, then read again, his hands shaking. What is it? Garrett asked. I'm being summoned to appear before the territorial council. Rowan set down the letter. Someone filed a formal complaint. Says I'm harboring dangerous elements, inciting rebellion against lawful business interests, violating property agreements. Ridley. Who else? Rowan's jaw tightened. He's using his connections, trying to destroy me through legal channels since everything else failed. When? 2 weeks. I have to be in the capital or face seizure of the estate. Garrett was quiet for a moment. What will you do? I'll go. I'll defend myself. Rowan looked out the window at the fields, at everything they'd built. I'm not losing this. Not now. He found Mara in the village school, teaching a class of 20 children. She stood at the front of the room, writing on the chalkboard, her voice clear and patient as she explained fractions using drawings of apples. When she saw him in the doorway, she knew immediately something was wrong. Take a break, she told the children. Practice your numbers. She met him outside. What happened? He showed her the letter. She read it twice, her expression darkening with each line. He's going after the estate. Yes. Can he win? I don't know. He has money, lawyers, friends on the council. Rowan took back the letter. But I have the truth. That has to count for something. Truth doesn't always win against power. Mara crossed her arms. You need more than just facts. You need witnesses, documentation, proof that everything you've done was legal and justified. I have the account books, records of every transaction, letters from Brennan's Cross thanking us for help. That's a start, but you need people, voices, stories that make the council see you as something other than a troublemaker. She looked at him directly. You need me there. No, if this goes badly, you'll be tied to it. Your reputation, my reputation is already tied to yours. We're married. Like it or not, what happens to you happens to me. She stepped closer. I'm coming. We face this together.
Mara.
Together, Rowan. That's the deal. He looked at her fierce, determined face and felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something bigger. All right, he said. Together. They left for the capital a week later. The journey took 4 days by carriage. Mara spent the time preparing, organizing documents, drafting testimony, making lists of potential witnesses. She worked with the same focused intensity she brought to everything else. Rowan watched her and wondered how he'd ever thought she was ordinary. The capital was everything Ashford Manor wasn't: loud, crowded, dirty, alive with commerce and noise. They found lodging at a modest inn near the council chambers. The hearing was scheduled for the following afternoon. That night, Rowan couldn't sleep. He paced the small room, running through arguments in his head, trying to anticipate what Ridley's lawyers would say. A knock at the door. Mara stood in the hallway, wrapped in a shawl. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," she said. "I can't stop thinking about tomorrow." "Good. Use it, plan, strategize." She came inside, closing the door behind her. "But don't panic. Panic makes you stupid. I'm not panicking." "You're pacing at midnight. That's panic." She sat in the room's only chair. "Talk to me. What are you afraid of?" "Losing. The estate. Everything we've built. Watching you go down with me because I wasn't smart enough to win." "Those are valid fears. Now set them aside." Her voice was firm. "Fear doesn't help. Preparation does. So let's prepare. Walk me through what you're going to say." They spent 2 hours rehearsing. Mara played the hostile questioner, firing challenges and accusations at him. She was brutal, relentless, picking apart weak arguments and forcing him to strengthen his points. By the time they finished, Rowan's head was clearer. "Better?" Mara asked. "Better. Thank you." She stood to leave, then paused. "Rowan, whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won. You came back to Ashford. You fixed what was broken. You helped people who needed it. The council can't take that away from you." "They can take everything else." "Only if you let them." She looked at him steadily. "Don't let them." She left. Rowan sat alone in the dark room, thinking about her words. You've already won. Maybe she was right. Maybe the outcome tomorrow didn't matter as much as what they'd already accomplished. But it still mattered enough to fight for. The council chambers were intimidating by design: high ceilings, marble floors, rows of seats rising in tiers like a theater. 5 council members sat at an elevated bench, looking down at the proceedings with distant judicial expressions. Ridley sat at one table with 3 lawyers, expensive suits, leather briefcases, the kind of representation that cost more than most people earned in a year. Rowan and Mara sat at the opposite table, alone except for a folder of documents and each other. The lead counselor, a gray-haired man named Ashford, called the session to order. "We're here to address a complaint filed by James Ridley against Rowan Blackthorne. The charges include interference with lawful business operations, incitement of workers to breach contract, and destruction of property." He looked at Ridley's lawyer. "You may begin." The lawyer stood. His name was Thornton, and he spoke like a man who'd never lost a case. "Honorable council members, this is a simple matter. Mr. Blackthorne, motivated by personal vendetta, interfered with my client's mining operation. He encouraged workers to break legally binding contracts. He assaulted my client in his own office. And he conspired with agitators to damage property and destroy Mr. Ridley's business reputation through false accusations published in irresponsible newspapers." Thornton laid out the case methodically. Contracts signed by workers. Medical records showing the fever outbreak wasn't as severe as reported. Testimony from Ridley's foreman claiming the warehouse fire was accidental, caused by careless settlers. It was smooth, polished, convincing. When Thornton finished, the council looked at Rowan expectantly. He stood, his heart pounding. "Everything Mr. Thornton said is a lie." Thornton's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a true one." Rowan pulled out the folder. "The fever outbreak killed 58 people in Brennan's Cross. I have death records, medical logs kept by my wife, who treated patients personally, witness testimony from survivors." He handed copies to the council. They glanced through them, expressions neutral. The workers who left Mr. Ridley's mines did so voluntarily after recovering from illness. They chose not to return because conditions underground were dangerous and exploitative. I have statements from 12 former miners describing those conditions. More documents passed forward. The warehouse fire was arson. 3 witnesses saw Mr. Ridley's men near the building immediately before it burned. The fire conveniently destroyed supplies meant to help the settlement survive independently of Mr. Ridley's employment. He looked directly at Ridley. This isn't about business, it's about control. Mr. Ridley wanted to force desperate people back into his mines. When we helped them find alternatives, he tried to destroy us. When that failed, he came here to destroy us legally. Thornton stood smoothly. Emotional appeals are not evidence, Mr. Blackthorne. You have documents, so do we. The council must weigh credibility, and frankly, between a respected businessman and a man known for abandoning his estate for months, I'd like to speak. Every head turned. Mara had stood up. The lead counselor frowned. Mrs. Blackthorne, this is irregular. I was there. I led the medical response to the fever. I witnessed Mr. Ridley's attempts to force sick workers back to the mines. I organized the relief efforts that he later tried to sabotage. Her voice was clear and steady. If this council wants the truth, you'll hear from someone who was present for all of it. The counselors conferred quietly. Then the lead counselor nodded. You may speak, briefly. Mara stepped forward. She didn't have notes, didn't need them. I'm not a politician or a lawyer. I'm just someone who was there. I saw children die from fever. I saw families torn apart. I saw people suffering because they had no options and no hope. She looked at each council member in turn. My husband and I gave them options. We provided medical care. We helped them build alternatives to exploitation. We invested our own resources because it was right, not because it was profitable. Mr. Ridley responded by trying to burn us out. When that failed, he came here to destroy us through legal manipulation. But you can't manipulate facts. 58 people died. That's not an exaggeration. 3 witnesses saw arson. That's not a lie. Workers chose freedom over exploitation. That's not rebellion, it's basic human dignity. She turned to Ridley. You tried to crush people because they wouldn't bow. You failed. Now you want this council to finish what you couldn't, but if you side with him, you're telling every worker in this territory that their lives matter less than profits. That power wins over justice. That exploitation is acceptable as long as it's legal. She looked back at the council. Is that really the precedent you want to set? The chamber was silent. Thornton stood, visibly rattled. This is inflammatory rhetoric. It's the truth. Mara didn't back down. You can ignore it, but you can't change it. She sat down. The council conferred for several minutes. Rowan tried to read their faces and failed. These were professional politicians. They revealed nothing. Finally, the lead counselor spoke. We'll recess to review evidence. Reconvene tomorrow morning for a decision. The gavel fell. The wait was agony. Rowan and Mara returned to the inn. They tried to eat dinner, but neither had appetite. They sat in the common room pretending to read, both too tense to focus. You were incredible today, Rowan said finally. I just told the truth. You did more than that. You made them see us as people, not just names in a complaint. He reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you. She didn't pull away. We're in this together, remember? I remember. They sat in silence, hands clasped across the scarred wood table. That night, Rowan dreamed of fire, of the estate burning, of losing everything he'd fought to save. He woke before dawn, sweating and shaking. Mara was already awake, dressed and sitting by the window. Bad dreams? The worst. Want to talk about it? No, He sat up, running hands through his hair. I'm scared. Of losing. Of failing you. Of proving everyone right who said I was worthless. You're not worthless. You've proven that 100 times over. She moved to sit beside him on the bed. But even if we lose today, it doesn't erase what we've done. Brennan's Cross is still free. Our village is still thriving. People's lives are better because of us. The council can't take that away. They can take the estate. The estate is just land and buildings. What matters is what we did with it. She touched his face, forcing him to look at her. You're not your father. You're not defined by what you inherit. You're defined by what you build. And you've built something remarkable. We've built it, together. Yes. Together. She stood. Now get dressed. Whatever happens today, we face it standing up. He shouted. The council chambers were even more crowded for the decision. Word had spread. Reporters filled the gallery. Settlers from Brennan's Cross had traveled to the Capitol overnight, packing the public seating. Thomas Pembroke sat in the front row with his sons. Rowan saw Marcus Webb taking notes in the press section. The reporter caught his eye and nodded. The council filed in. Their faces were unreadable. The lead counselor called the session to order. We've reviewed all evidence and testimony. This is our decision. Rowan's heart hammered. First, regarding the charge of interference with lawful business operations. We find Mr. Blackthorne acted within his rights as a landowner and private citizen. Providing medical assistance and economic alternatives does not constitute unlawful interference. Ridley's face darkened. Second, regarding incitement to breach contract. The workers in question left Mr. Ridley's employment voluntarily after recovering from documented illness. No evidence suggests Mr. Blackthorne coerced them. This charge is dismissed. Thornton was writing furiously. Third, regarding the assault allegation. While we acknowledge Mr. Blackthorne struck Mr. Ridley, the circumstances suggest provocation following suspected arson. We decline to prosecute, though we caution Mr. Blackthorne against future violence. The lead counselor looked directly at Ridley. However, we have concerns about the working conditions in your mining operation. Based on testimony and documentation provided, we're launching a formal investigation. Your operations will be inspected. If violations are found, appropriate penalties will be assessed. Ridley stood. This is outrageous. Sit down, Mr. Ridley. The counselor's voice was sharp. You came here seeking justice. You're receiving it, just not the kind you wanted. He turned back to Rowan. Mr. Blackthorne, Mrs. Blackthorne, this council finds in your favor. All charges are dismissed. Furthermore, we're officially recognizing Brennan's Cross as an autonomous settlement under your stewardship. You've demonstrated responsible leadership in difficult circumstances. We expect that to continue. The gavel fell. The chamber erupted. Settlers from Brennan's Cross cheered. Reporters rushed to file stories. Pembroke was grinning. Even Garrett, standing in the back, was clapping. Rowan stood frozen, barely able to process what had happened. They'd won. Actually won. Mara grabbed his hand. We did it. You did it. That speech, we did it, she repeated firmly. Together. Ridley shoved past them, his lawyers in tow. His face was red with rage. This isn't over, Blackthorne. Yes, it is, Mara said quietly. You lost. Accept it. Ridley stormed out. The settlers surrounded them, shaking hands, offering congratulations. Collins was there, grinning broadly. The settlement's going to throw a celebration. You're both invited. Required, actually. We'll be there, Mara promised. Marcus Webb approached with his notebook. Mrs. Blackthorne, can I get a quote for tomorrow's edition? Print the truth, she said. That's all I ask. I always do. Webb smiled, especially when it's this good. Outside the chambers, the spring sun was bright. Rowan and Mara stood on the steps, looking out at the crowded Capitol streets. What now? Rowan asked. Now we go home. We plant crops. We build more. We keep going. Mara looked at him. Same as always. Just like that? Just like that. She started down the steps. Come on, we have a long ride ahead. Rowan followed, feeling lighter than he had in months. Maybe years. They'd faced the worst and survived. They'd stood up to power and won. They'd proven that doing right mattered, even when it was hard. And they'd done it together. The celebration at Brennan's Cross lasted 3 days. The entire settlement turned out. Food appeared from nowhere. Roasted meat, fresh bread, early vegetables from greenhouses. Someone brought out a fiddle. Dancing lasted until dawn. On the second night, Collins stood on a makeshift stage and called for quiet. We all know why we're here. These two people, he pointed at Rowan and Mara, saved us when we were dying. They fought for us when no one else would. They risked everything because it was right. He raised a cup. To Rowan and Mara Blackthorne, the best damn leaders this settlement could ask for. The crowd roared approval. Rowan felt his throat tighten. These people, strangers 6 months ago, were calling him a leader. calling them heroes, celebrating them like family. Speech, someone shouted. Rowan looked at Mara. She nodded. He stepped forward. I don't know what to say, except thank you. You trusted us when you had no reason to. You fought alongside us. You built something incredible here. Brennan's Cross isn't just a settlement anymore. It's proof that people can choose their own path, that they can stand up to exploitation and win. That community matters more than profit. He paused. My wife taught me that. She showed me what real strength looks like, what real leadership is. I was a coward before I met her. She made me brave. He looked at Mara. Everything good in my life started the day she decided I was worth fixing. So if you want to thank someone, thank her. The crowd turned to Mara, applauding. She stood reluctantly. I'm not good at speeches. I'm better at doing, but I'll say this. You didn't need fixing. You just needed a chance. We gave you that chance. What you built was all you. She raised her own cup. To Brennan's Cross. May it thrive for generations. The celebration continued into the night. Later, Rowan found Mara sitting alone by the river that ran through the settlement. The water rushed past, swollen with snowmelt, carrying the winter away. He sat beside her without speaking. Tired? He asked finally. Exhausted. Happy. Both. She looked at him. I never thought we'd get here. Any of this. Neither did I. When I married you, I thought my life was over, that I'd spend the rest of my days locked in a wing of your manor, forgotten and useless. She was quiet for a moment. You gave me something I didn't expect. Purpose, partnership, a reason to fight. You gave me everything, a home, a community, a future that doesn't terrify me. He turned to face her. I love you, Mara. The words were out before he could stop them. She stared at him. What? I love you. I think I have for months. I was just too stupid to realize it. He took her hand. You're the strongest, bravest, most remarkable person I've ever known, and I love you for it. For all of it. Mara's eyes were wet. Rowan, you don't have to say it back. I know this started wrong. I know I was terrible to you. I just needed you to know that you matter, that you've always mattered, that I... She kissed him. It was sudden, clumsy, perfect. She tasted like spring water and hope. When they broke apart, she was smiling, actually smiling, wide and genuine. I love you too, she said. You infuriating, impossible, wonderful man. I love you. They sat by the river until the stars came out, hands clasped, shoulders touching, watching the water carry the past downstream. They returned to Ashford Manor a week later. The estate had changed again. The fields were planted. New families had moved into tenant houses. The village school had expanded. Everything thrived. Mrs. Calloway met them at the door. Welcome home, sir, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Calloway, Mara said. How are things? Excellent. The new tenants are settling in well. Mr. Pembroke stopped by yesterday with plans for the summer harvest, and you received 3 letters from Brennan's Cross. I put them in your study. Our study, Rowan corrected. It's not just mine anymore. Mrs. Calloway's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. As you say, sir. They spent the afternoon going through accumulated correspondence. Letters from Brennan's Cross detailing the settlement's progress, requests from other struggling communities asking for advice, even an inquiry from the territorial government about Mara serving on an advisory committee for frontier healthcare. You should do it, Rowan said, reading over her shoulder. It's in the capital. I'd be gone for weeks at a time. So? You're qualified. They need your expertise. He looked at her. I'm not going to hold you back, Mara. Not anymore. If you want to do this, do it. What about the estate? We'll manage. We always do. He kissed her forehead. Besides, I've learned a few things. I can handle a few weeks on my own. Are you sure? Positive. Go change the world. I'll keep this corner of it running. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she folded the letter carefully. I'll think about it. That night, they had dinner in the dining room, but instead of sitting at opposite ends of the table, they sat side by side. This feels strange, Mara said. Good strange or bad strange? Good strange, like we're actually married instead of just legally bound. We are actually married. You know what I mean." He did. After dinner, they walked through the garden together. The roses Mara had pruned were beginning to bloom. The fountain ran clear and steady. Everything she'd restored was flourishing. "Do you remember the first time I saw you out here?" Rowan asked. "Pulling weeds in the rain. Very romantic." "I thought you were just some woman who came with the house, a problem to manage. I was such an idiot." "Yes, you were." She squeezed his hand. "But you got better. Because of you. Because you chose to." She stopped walking. "That's the difference, Rowan. You could have stayed bitter and selfish, but you chose to change. That's not on me. That's on you. We make each other better." "Yes, we do." They stood in the garden as the sun set, painting the sky orange and gold. The manor rose behind them, solid and enduring. The fields stretched ahead, green with promise. "I have something for you," Rowan said. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a small emerald. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "She was the only blackthorn who married for love instead of obligation. I thought, if you wanted, you could wear it. As a real wedding ring, not the one I gave you in the magistrate's office. Something that actually means something." Mara's hands shook as she took the ring. She slid it onto her finger beside the plain band from their wedding. It fit perfectly. "It's beautiful. So are you." She laughed. "I'm not beautiful. I'm practical and plain and—" "Beautiful," he insisted. "Because you're brave. Because you're kind. Because you see people instead of using them. That's the most beautiful thing I know." She kissed him, long and slow and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was crying. "Happy tears?" he asked. "The happiest." She wiped her eyes. "I never thought I'd have this, any of this. A home, a purpose, someone who sees me. I see you every day, and I'm going to keep seeing you for the rest of my life." They walked back to the manor hand in hand. Inside, fires burned warm. Servants moved through familiar routines. Everything was as it should be, but also different. Better. That night, Mara didn't go to the East Wing. She stayed with Rowan, curled against him in the bed that was now theirs. "Tell me about tomorrow," she said sleepily. "What about it?" "What we'll do, the work, the plans." "Tomorrow, we'll check the fields. Meet with Garrett about crop rotation. Maybe ride to the village and see how the school's doing." He kissed the top of her head. "Normal things, good things." "I like that." "Me too." She fell asleep in his arms. Rowan lay awake a while longer, listening to her breathe, feeling the weight of her against him. 6 months ago, he'd been a coward running from responsibility. She'd been a woman locked away and forgotten. Now they were partners, leaders, people who mattered. They'd fought for it, bled for it, nearly died for it, and they'd won. Not because they were perfect, not because it was easy, but because they chose to keep fighting when quitting would have been simpler. Because they chose each other. Outside, the moon rose over Ashford Manor. The fields slept beneath the stars. The village dreamed of tomorrow. And in Brennan's Cross, 15 miles north, fires burned in new homes built by free people. The world was changing, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. And it had all started with a marriage no one wanted and a woman no one saw. The woman who rebuilt an empire from nothing. The woman who saved a coward from himself. The woman who proved that strength wasn't inherited. It was forged in fire and tempered by choice. Rowan closed his eyes and slept. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new battles. But tonight, he had everything he needed. A home worth fighting for, a community worth serving, and a wife worth the world. That was enough. That was everything. Years later, when people told the story of Ashford Manor and Brennan's Cross, they talked about the fever outbreak and the fight against exploitation. They talked about the woman who stood down armed men and the man who chose courage over comfort. But what they remembered most was simpler. They remembered two people who refused to give up, who chose partnership over pride, who built something lasting from the ruins of something broken, and who proved that the best legacies aren't inherited. They're earned, one choice at a time.